Okay, we are talking with Craig Gordon today at Youth and AIDS Project, which is otherwise known as YAP.
Yep.
And so, a few questions we have to ask him. You're dealing with different types of people. Are there any special cultural considerations to consider when working with the population that you work with? Do you you work with a range of different groups? So
Right, and I think so when we're thinking about HIV, there's not like one universal way that we do HIV work, right? So the way I might chat with you about HIV as a older woman, it would be like totally different than how I chat with like a young gay man about HIV, right? And so I think when we're thinking about HIV, we have to think about where folks' identity intersects at, right? So thinking of like gender and race and sexual orientation, country of origin, things like that, like that'll change how I like have the conversation about HIV. And so like there's not like one universal way to like do it or have a conversation or do prevention or do like care. So
that's good to know that you kind of identify with the individual, the culture. You take that all into account, and you can connect with them. Because the important thing is connecting, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times is like, at least for me on the prevention side, I let them lead the conversation. So what does prevention look like for you? So if they started, I also then have things to pull from as well.
Good listening skills. I love it.
I mean, I try.
All right. Okay. Are there specific cultural practices that may be perceived as resistant? I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. Or not maybe resistant, maybe they don't know.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes, like, I think it's education about how HIV has changed, right? So, like, when PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, that long word, or it's a drug called Truvada, we can now use that drug to help prevent folks from getting HIV. So it's one pill once a day that you take every day, and it helps prevent you from getting HIV. But when it first came out, you had a lot of people resistant to it because for so long, all they had heard in prevention is condoms, lube, and testing, right? So now you had a new intervention. So at first people were resistant, and still like for some communities, so if you think about like African American folks or like other folks of color who sometimes have a mistrust with medicine or hospitals or doctors or providers, like they might be a little wary about getting on something, and so it's taking all that into account and having a conversation about it to see if it's right for them.
Building that trust level up.
Yeah.
That's so crucial and so very important. Okay, any cultural barriers in receiving help? Receiving help. Oh, yeah. Remember back in the day of Ryan White? Oh, my goodness. It's changed and improved so much since then.
I kind of giggle because I think a barrier to receiving help is financial, but it's not like almost like in the way that you would think, right? So for low-income folks, we can help get them like insurance from the state. So in Minnesota, we'd help them get MA. And then every state has an AIDS drug assistance program, which will help people pay for like the copays for their prescriptions or doctor visits and things like that. However, if you cross a threshold in your wage, you don't get access to those services. And so I think it's like 300 or 400% of the federal poverty line. So anybody who makes more than about $47,000 or $48,000 a year all of a sudden doesn't qualify for things like the AIDS drug assistance program.
Oh my goodness.
So then you have to figure out a way to sort of get some of that support that you weren't getting before. But sometimes it can be a challenge for people with like higher deductibles or who have like small co-pays that they can't really afford. So while there are programs to help folks, I think sometimes for people living with HIV, it becomes like a balancing act of like, I want to make a livable wage, but I can't make too much because if I go over, I lose this benefit. So it's kind of a give and take.
Like a tightrope, we got to do it this way, or
But also too, oftentimes we see folks come in and they don't know about those programs too, those assistance programs. And so I think we could be doing a better job, just like as providers, in letting people know like there are options to help sort of like break down some of those barriers to accessing help and care.
That's wonderful. Okay. I think I have one more question. How is mental health perceived in the community of those with HIV?
I think often we.
I think you mentioned the DSM. It's changed, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, like I mean, like yeah, that's a conversation that we previously had. So like things like being gay came out of the DSM, and so we can have like those conversations. I think when I was thinking about it, I think oftentimes. So even though we've changed from the 80s and like we've evolved and like there's medicine and people are living longer, fuller, healthier lives, that like there's still a stigma and shame that comes, especially with the new diagnosis. There's a loneliness you sort of feel, like you begin to ask yourself those questions that I think we all ask ourselves at certain points, like, will someone love me? Like, will people like stay in my life? Will I be able to keep my friends? What does this mean? Will I die? Like, and so I think oftentimes like accessing mental health, especially after a new diagnosis, is kind of important. But even just like ongoing like support to like take care of yourself. Oftentimes I think we think so much about the physical health that we forget to help people connect that spiritual and emotional health too. But thankfully, at least like in the Twin Cities, we have options for that. That's like LGBTQ or HIV positive specific. So there's a resource, Just Us Health. That organization just opened up a mental health clinic, and it's specific for HIV positive folks and
Really?
LGBTQ
Nice.
folks. So obviously we've seen that this is an issue, or this is an area where we as providers need to grow and give easier access to gaining those services. So.
And you counsel some people, do you? Well, you kind of.
Yeah, I do a little bit in prevention. So I do like a risk assessment before I start every HIV test, and that just sort of gives like me a foundation to know what kinds of conversations like to have with people. But it really is, at least on my end, it's a lot of the client coming, making like a prevention like plan for themselves, and then me just being an ear to like listen to them, or supporting them, or giving the resources like to them that they need to do that, and do that well, and do that in a way that's not further shaming, right, or further like stigmatizing, but
No re-traumatizing anybody.
exactly.
I love it.
And that all starts with like just listening and having a conversation and letting the client sort of lead that conversation and what that looks like.
All right. Well, thank you so much. You have this warm, humble, friendly, welcoming personality that is just appreciated.
I try.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you, my dear.
Yeah.
And have a great day.
You too.